I'm often asked, where's a good place to buy a motor? Well, in Canada, probably Princess Auto. In the States, probably Harbor Freight. But I've never been desperate enough to actually have to buy a new motor, so I thought I'd show you the motors I've got on my machines and where I've got them from. This is my homemade bandsaw 2, and on it is a 1/2 horsepower furnace motor. It's not the most powerful, but I don't do any resawing on this saw, so it works just fine. This one, I think it came from a yard sale. On my strip sander is another furnace motor. This is a 1/3 horsepower motor, and I'm not sure if I got that one from a yard sale or if I picked it up off the curb. Old belt-driven furnace motors are great to reuse, but belt-driven furnaces haven't been installed since the 1980s, and those furnaces have all been thrown out already, so the only belt-driven furnace motors that you can get is if somebody saved the motor and then eventually decides to get rid of it. Here's my big old lathe, and on here I've got a 1/2 horsepower motor. This one I picked off the garbage. It's 1750 RPM and it's reversible, which is very useful for a lathe. Here's my small dust collector, and on here is a 2/3 horsepower 3500 RPM motor, and I bought a really crappy table saw that had an induction motor on it just for that motor. It cost me $25, but it was worth it, because to buy a motor like that new would have cost a lot more. Here's my bandsaw, my first homemade bandsaw, and on here is a 1.5 horsepower motor. It runs in 220 volts. Came with this switch. It's completely sealed and it has no cooling fan on it whatsoever, but it's never gotten terribly hot on me. Only problem with this motor is it weighs about 85 pounds, so not exactly portable. Here's the motor for my lathe. This is a 1/3 horsepower pump motor. Starting torque on it is very low, not a problem for a lathe. This is the motor on my buffing wheel. It's a 1/4 horsepower. That's a bit weak. I do stall it from time to time when I buff things really hard. Oh yeah, and this one came from a yard sale. This one came out of a dumpster. And this one came with my beastly lathe that I bought at a yard sale. Paid $70 for the motor and lathe. I am perhaps a bit of a collector of motors. Here's a box fan motor, a ceiling fan motor, a bread maker motor, and this is a furnace exhaust blower motor. None of these are really powerful enough for a machine, but I've got more motors down here. 1/2 horsepower from a yard sale, probably 2 horsepower. Somebody sold that to me for $15. This one came off of a compressor somebody threw out, 3/4 horsepower. This is an old table saw motor I bought at a yard sale. This is a washing machine motor. This is a furnace motor that's never been used, $5 at a yard sale. And that one down there, I'm not sure where that one came from, probably a yard sale. And this motor a friend gave to me. It's 2 horsepower, very powerful. I use that for my sawmill. People ask me from time to time, they say, I have a 2 horsepower shop vac motor. What can I reuse that for? See, this one is 2 horsepower, supposedly. The answer is nothing. Shop vac motors are only good for shop vacs, and that's it. Perhaps more reusable would be a bench grinder motor. People have asked me about that from time to time. I'm not sure if they're powerful enough. This one's only a 1 amp motor, so it wouldn't have enough power for a homemade machine, but you'd have more luck with that than a shop vac. I've never tried a bench grinder motor myself, though. And there's a few more motors in my other shop, so let's check that out. And now I'm out in my other shop, and I've got a few more motors here to show you. This is a really old 1/4 horsepower motor. It came with a homemade metal lathe that this was also part of. The motor on this homemade blower is from an old clothes dryer, and it works surprisingly well, surprisingly powerful. It might even be good enough to power a small bandsaw. And then next to this is my cheap dust collector, which I only paid $150 for, and it has a supposedly 1 horsepower motor. It's a sealed motor, which is really good. So if you need a motor, buying a dust collector just for the motor may be a good deal. Here on my 14-inch homemade bandsaw, I have a 1 horsepower motor, and this is a pool pump motor that the neighbor threw out. The thermal fuse on it had blown, so I shorted that and I'm using it here. Because I don't use it unattended, I'm not too worried about it lacking the thermal fuse. And on my 14-inch bandsaw, that one of course came with a motor. It's got a sealed 3/4 horsepower motor, And I've actually ran out of power on this saw sometimes when I was resawing some stuff that was about 8 inches thick. I was doing that by taking this blade guide off and having an internal blade guide up here to give me more resaw capacity. And here's a 2/3 horsepower motor from the Sears Craftsman bandsaw that I failed to fix. I kept the motor. This may power a bandsaw at some point in the future. And here's a box fan motor. For small motors, they're kind of powerful, but not really enough to power a real machine. And down here is an old garage door opener, and it has a supposedly 1/2 horsepower induction motor on it. I really doubt that this motor is meant for continuous duty. I'd probably have to run it at a reduced voltage if I wanted to run it continuous, at which point, at best, I would have 1/4 horsepower. And another motor, which I don't know why I'm saving, this is from a radial arm saw. It's a 10 amp motor. These brush motors, they're not really good for anything other than what they're made for. So other than trying to turn this into a table saw, that motor has no use at all. And I've already made 2 homemade table saws, so I should just throw this one out. And up here is a furnace blower motor. This one is a brushless DC motor, which is kind of cool because they can run at any speed. If only I knew what the control signals going to it were. As it is, I don't think I'll be able to use it, but if you get a furnace motor that is not brushless DC, those could be quite useful for a tool as well. They're typically 1/3 to 1/2 horsepower. And yet another motor. This is a sump pump. It's a 1/3 horsepower motor. These are 1750 RPM, quite usable for a homemade machine. So as you can see, there's motors just about everywhere. So if you're even vaguely thinking of building a homemade machine and you come across a motor, just save it, because even a 1/4 horsepower motor will do in a pinch until you find something bigger. And since I filmed this, I've used up yet another motor. Video coming soon.